"I saw it once and now I want that," the Apache woman said, lowering her dress to the lonely man. The small town where he lived was quiet most of the time. It sat on the edge of rolling hills and wide plains, where the wind carried the scent of earth and grass. Most people in the town knew each other, and everyone had a routine. Shops opened and closed at the same hours every day, and the evenings were calm, with birds returning to their nests and smoke rising slowly from chimneys. The man, whose name was David, had lived in this town for years. He liked the peace it offered, even if it was sometimes lonely. He worked in a small warehouse near the center of town. His work was simple, but it required attention and care, and it kept him busy enough to forget some of the emptiness he felt in his personal life. David was not unfriendly, but he rarely spoke to anyone outside of work. He preferred the quiet. People in the town knew him as reliable, polite, and private. They often assumed he was content, but David carried memories of the past, some he wished he could forget, others he held on to as if they were part of who he was. He had friends once, people he trusted, but life had changed those connections. Over time, he found comfort in solitude and the steady rhythm of his days. One evening, the town held a small gathering in the community center. It was one of those occasions meant to bring people together, though it rarely changed much in David's world. Families came to enjoy music, to sell handmade crafts, and to share stories of their days. The air smelled of baked bread, roasted corn, and a faint hint of wood smoke from nearby stoves. Children ran around laughing, and older folks sat in the shade, talking quietly to each other. David did not attend many gatherings. The idea of crowds and noise was not appealing to him, but that day, something drew him out. A feeling he could not explain made him want to see the faces in the crowd, to observe life moving around him. Perhaps it was curiosity, perhaps a sense that something unusual might happen. He walked slowly toward the center, keeping to the edges where the noise was softer. That's when he first saw her. She was standing apart from the crowd, near the edge of the gathering, observing quietly. She carried herself in a way that caught his attention immediately. Unlike the others, she did not seem concerned with what anyone thought of her. She was tall, with long dark hair that fell over her shoulders. Her eyes had a steady, direct gaze that made it hard for anyone to look away for long. There was a calm confidence in her, but also a warmth that made people feel safe, even if they did not know her. David found himself watching her more than he wanted to admit. Something about the way she moved, how she listened, and how she occasionally smiled to herself intrigued him. He realized she was different from anyone he had met in this town, or anywhere else, for that matter. While others chatted nervously or laughed loudly, she seemed present in every moment. It was as if she were aware of life's beauty in a way that David had forgotten existed. Eventually, their eyes met. The moment was brief, but it left a strange feeling in his chest. He did not know her, yet he felt a pull toward her, a curiosity he could not explain. People around them seemed distant, as if the noise of the gathering existed in another world. All David could focus on was her. Later that evening, when the crowd had thinned, they found themselves standing closer together. There was no plan, no reason for them to speak beyond politeness, yet a conversation began. It was simple at first. She asked his name, he gave it, and she nodded as if she had expected it. There was a lightness in her voice, a rhythm that made him feel calm but alert at the same time. They talked about the town, about the weather, and about small everyday things that seemed ordinary but felt different when she spoke. As the conversation continued, David noticed how she listened, really listened. She did not just hear his words, she seemed to understand the thoughts behind them. When he mentioned small frustrations about work or the monotony of life, she nodded knowingly, never judging, only acknowledging. For the first time in years, David felt that someone was genuinely paying attention to him. Over the next hour, they shared more. She told him about her life in small pieces. She spoke of her family, her travels, and her experiences growing up in a different community. She did not overshare, nor did she try to impress him. Her words were simple, honest, and direct. David felt both fascinated and intimidated by her honesty. There was a freedom in how she spoke, a sense that she lived her life according to her own rules rather than the expectations of others. David found himself opening up in a way he rarely did. He spoke about his work, his routines, and the quiet loneliness that often accompanied him. She listened, sometimes with a small smile, sometimes with a thoughtful frown. There was no rush, no pressure to speak more than he wished. It was refreshing. He realized how starved he had been for genuine human connection. At one point, she asked him a question that made him pause. It was simple but unexpected. "What do you want most in your life?" David hesitated. He was not used to being asked such a direct question. Most people would have laughed it off or given a vague answer, but something in her eyes encouraged honesty. He admitted quietly, "I want to feel like I matter, like someone notices me for who I really am, not just the work I do or the routine I follow." She nodded slowly, understanding, without any words of pity or judgment. She simply said, "Then you should pay attention to the moments that make you feel alive. They are rare, but they are there." David thought about her words long after she said them. There was a truth in them that struck him deeply. The gathering around them had lost its noise. For a moment, the world felt still. He realized that meeting her had shifted something inside him. He had always believed that life was dull, that ordinary people lived ordinary lives. But her presence reminded him that there was more. More beauty, more honesty, more possibility. As the sun dipped below the horizon and shadows stretched across the town square, the crowd slowly dispersed. David and the woman walked a short distance together, not because it was necessary, but because the conversation felt incomplete. They spoke about the stars beginning to appear, the chill in the evening air, and small stories from the past that made them both laugh quietly. Finally, they reached a point where they had to part ways. Neither wanted to say goodbye, and yet both understood it was necessary. She smiled at him, a soft, knowing smile, and said, "I'm glad I met you tonight. Remember what you said, you deserve moments that make you feel alive. Don't forget that." David nodded, feeling a mixture of longing and gratitude. As she walked away, he felt the first real spark of curiosity and hope in years. Something about this encounter lingered in his mind. It was not about romance or fleeting excitement. It was about seeing a person who lived fully, who spoke honestly, and who reminded him that life could be different from the routines he had accepted. That night, David could not sleep. He lay awake thinking about the conversation, replaying her words, her gestures, and the way she carried herself. He realized that what he felt was not simple attraction, it was inspiration. She had shown him a glimpse of a life he had almost forgotten existed, a life that included risk, honesty, and the courage to be oneself. He decided quietly in the stillness of his room that he would remember this night. He would remember the way she listened, the way she spoke, and the way she made him feel seen. For the first time in a long while, he felt that perhaps the world was not entirely predictable, and that something new could happen to him, something meaningful, something worth noticing. Even as the days passed, David kept thinking about her. He did not obsess or act impulsively, but the memory of her presence stayed with him, gently nudging him to pay attention to the world around him. It was a small awakening, subtle but powerful. And deep inside, he knew that their meeting, brief as it was, would change the way he experienced life from that moment forward. In the quiet town, where life moved slowly and predictably, a spark had been lit. It was quiet, almost imperceptible, but it promised growth, curiosity, and a reminder that even in ordinary places, extraordinary moments could occur. David felt that spark deeply, and he understood that some encounters were meant not to last forever, but to remind us of what we have forgotten, the capacity to notice, to feel, and to awaken to life again. After their first encounter, David could not stop thinking about the woman. He remembered her calm confidence, the way she listened so carefully, and how her words had awakened something he had almost forgotten, a sense of curiosity and wonder about life. Every morning at work, even during the busiest hours in the warehouse, his mind wandered to her. He thought about how strange it was that one brief conversation could feel so meaningful, as if she had quietly entered his life to remind him of possibilities he had ignored. Days passed, and David began noticing small things in the world around him that he had once overlooked. The way sunlight streamed through the warehouse windows, casting patterns on the floor. The smell of freshly baked bread from the small bakery on the corner. The laughter of children playing in the streets. Each moment seemed more vivid, more alive. He realized that seeing someone who truly noticed the world made him notice it too. Then, one quiet afternoon, he saw her again. She was walking through the town square, carrying a small basket of goods. She looked up and caught his gaze, smiling in the same warm, knowing way as before. David felt a sudden rush of excitement, tempered by the calm he had learned to carry over the years. This time he decided not to wait for chance to bring them together. He walked toward her, keeping his steps measured, trying not to appear anxious. As he approached, she looked at him curiously, as if she had expected him. "Hello again," she said softly, her voice carrying the same rhythm and honesty that had captivated him before. "Hi," David replied, unsure of what to say next. He felt a little nervous, but it was different from the nervousness he had felt around others. This was a mix of anticipation and curiosity, a quiet energy that made him feel alive. They began walking slowly through the square, talking casually about small things, the weather, the changes in the town, and familiar faces they both recognized. But soon the conversation shifted. She began asking questions that seemed simple at first, yet were deeply thoughtful. "Do you ever feel like life is passing by and you are just watching it happen?" she asked, her gaze steady. David paused, thinking carefully. He realized she was not asking for idle chatter. She wanted honesty, and he felt compelled to give it. "Sometimes," he admitted quietly, "I think a lot about the past and I get caught in routines. I forget to notice the moments that matter." She nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. "It's easy to get lost in routines," she said, "but noticing life is like catching a glimpse of something rare. It doesn't happen often, and when it does, it can change how you see everything." Her words struck him deeply. There was a gentle wisdom in the way she spoke, as if she had learned something about life that few others had. He felt both inspired and slightly challenged. Meeting her made him aware of his own limitations, but it also offered the possibility of growth. They continued walking together, and David noticed the way her eyes moved over the world. She paid attention to everything: the pattern of clouds, the way a bird landed on a roof, the laughter of children playing in the distance. She had a presence that made the world seem alive, and it was contagious. David found himself slowing down, noticing details he had ignored for years. He felt a connection not just to her, but to life itself, as if she had quietly opened a door to a world he had forgotten existed. After a while, they found a quiet bench beneath a large tree in the park. They sat down, and the conversation turned more personal. She shared small stories from her childhood, moments of joy and struggle, without any need to exaggerate or impress. David listened, fascinated by her openness and courage. She spoke of challenges she had faced growing up, of choices she had made, and of the ways she had learned to trust herself. David realized that she had a strength he admired. She faced life honestly, without hiding behind fear or pretending to be someone she was not. Her words were simple, but they carried a depth of understanding that made him think deeply about his own life. He began to reflect on the walls he had built around himself, the routines and habits that kept him safe but also limited him. Meeting her made him wonder if it was time to change, to step out of his comfort zone and experience life more fully. At one point, she asked him another question, more direct this time. What would you do if you weren't afraid? David was taken aback. Fear had shaped so many of his choices, often quietly without him noticing. He thought of the risks he had avoided, the conversations he had not started, and the opportunities he had let pass. I'm not sure, he admitted. I've spent so long playing it safe that I don't know what I'd do differently, she smiled gently. It's never too late to start, she said. Even small steps matter. Life doesn't have to be perfect to be meaningful. Sometimes noticing, trying, and feeling is enough. Her words stayed with him long after that afternoon. Over the next few days, David began to notice subtle changes in himself. He spoke more with coworkers, paid attention to the small joys in his daily life, and found moments of reflection that he had neglected for years. Her presence had awakened something in him, a desire to live more consciously, to experience life rather than merely observe it. Then, a week later, they met again at a local market. She was there buying vegetables and fruits, and he found himself walking beside her without thinking. Their conversation started casually, but she quickly steered it toward deeper topics, as if she instinctively knew how to draw out the thoughts he had kept hidden. They spoke of dreams, regrets, hopes, and fears. The discussion was intense but comfortable, honest but gentle. At one point, she said something that made David pause. Sometimes people confuse wanting something with needing it, she said softly. But true understanding comes from knowing the difference. Desire can guide us, but it doesn't always define us. David thought carefully about her words. He realized she was speaking not only to him but to herself as well. There was a clarity in how she saw the world, a balance between passion and awareness that he had rarely encountered. Her insight made him reflect on his own motivations, on what he truly sought in life beyond comfort or routine. Their conversations became a regular part of his days. Whenever they met, David felt both challenged and comforted. She encouraged him to see beyond the ordinary, to question assumptions, and to appreciate the beauty in small moments. He began keeping notes in his mind, remembering her advice, and trying to apply it quietly to his own life. One afternoon, as they walked through a quiet street lined with old buildings, she made another observation. People often forget that connection matters more than possession, she said. It's not about owning something or someone. It's about sharing moments, understanding, and being present. David realized she was teaching him an important lesson about relationships, about life itself. He had spent years focused on goals, achievements, and safety, but she reminded him that meaning often came from experience, presence, and understanding, not control or certainty. By now, David had begun to feel a deep admiration and respect for her. It was not a shallow attraction. It was a recognition of the depth of her character and the way she could touch lives simply by being honest and present. He admired her courage, her wisdom, and the way she carried herself without fear of judgment. She, in turn, seemed to notice his growth. She encouraged him gently, praised small changes, and celebrated his efforts to notice and engage with the world more fully. Their bond deepened, not through drama or sensationalism, but through quiet moments of shared understanding. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, they walked together along a riverbank near the edge of town. The water reflected the sky, calm and steady, much like the feeling that had grown between them. She turned to him and said, "You're learning to see life differently. That's all anyone can hope for: attention, presence, and courage." David felt a swell of gratitude. He had met many people in his life, but few had left a mark like she had. Her words, her presence, and the quiet insistence that life could be lived fully had awakened something he thought he had lost forever. As the evening grew darker, they parted again, knowing that life would continue, that routines and responsibilities awaited them both. But this time, the farewell felt different. It was not filled with longing or confusion, but with recognition. They had shared something meaningful, something that could not be measured by time or distance. David walked home slowly, reflecting on the day. He understood that what he valued most was not her attention, but the awakening she had sparked within him. He felt a sense of possibility he had not known in years, a quiet hope that life could be richer, deeper, and more alive if he allowed himself to notice and engage. That night, he wrote in his journal for the first time in years. Not long, not detailed, but enough to capture his thoughts. He wrote about the conversations, the lessons, and the small moments that had made life feel extraordinary. He knew that the path ahead would not always be easy, but he felt ready to walk it, inspired by the honesty and courage of a woman who had reminded him of life's possibilities. In the following days, David found himself paying attention to details he had ignored: birds in the trees, the rhythm of the wind, the smiles of strangers. Each moment felt more alive, more vibrant, because he had been shown that noticing mattered. And with each new day, he felt a growing gratitude for the brief, meaningful encounters that reminded him of life's beauty. By the end of this period, David knew that his life had shifted in ways he could not yet fully understand. It was not about love, not about desire in the ordinary sense, but about awakening. She had entered his world briefly, yet left a lasting mark, a spark that would guide him toward living fully and honestly. And in this realization, David discovered something precious: the ability to appreciate life, not for what it promised, but for what it quietly offered every day. Days turned into weeks, and David's life began to feel different in ways he could not fully explain. The spark she had ignited in him, the curiosity, the awareness, the sense of life's possibilities, lingered constantly in his mind. Yet, at the same time, he felt a growing tension inside him, a quiet conflict that he could neither name nor control. Meeting her had shown him a new world, but it had also forced him to confront the parts of himself he had long avoided: his fear of change, his self-doubt, and the loneliness he had learned to accept as normal. He found himself reflecting on their conversations more deeply than ever before. Each word she had spoken seemed to carry layers of meaning that unfolded only when he thought about them quietly, alone, or during small, reflective moments in his day. What would you do if you weren't afraid? That question returned to him again and again, echoing in his mind at unexpected times. It was simple, yet it unsettled him, because he realized that fear had shaped nearly every choice he had made in life. David's routine remained the same on the surface. He still worked at the warehouse, still ate the same meals, and still walked the same streets. But inside, he felt an invisible shift. He noticed details he had long ignored: the way the sunlight made patterns on the floor, the quiet hum of life in the town, the rhythm of people going about their daily work. Everything seemed sharper, brighter, more alive. And in all of it, he could sense her presence, not physically, but as a gentle awareness, a reminder that life was larger than routine. Then, one morning, as he walked to work, he saw her again. She was sitting on a low stone wall near the town fountain, sketching in a small notebook. The sunlight fell across her face, highlighting her focused expression, and David felt a familiar rush of admiration and respect. This time, instead of approaching immediately, he paused, giving himself a moment to breathe and to collect his thoughts. When she looked up and saw him, she smiled, not in a playful or teasing way, but with warmth and recognition. "Good morning, David," she said. "Good morning," he replied, feeling both excitement and nervousness. There was something in her gaze that made him aware of all the things he had been thinking about lately: the uncertainty, the fear, and the desire to grow. They began walking together again, slowly, side by side. The conversation started with casual topics: the slow awakening of spring in the town, the small repairs happening in the market, the familiar faces they both recognized. Yet as they walked, the discussion deepened naturally. She asked questions that felt gentle but deliberate. Do you ever feel trapped by what you know, by the life you've built? David thought about that for a moment. He had always told himself that his life was stable, that routine meant safety. But she was asking him to see beyond safety, beyond the familiar, to a life that required courage, honesty, and attention. Sometimes, he admitted quietly, I think about it, but I don't always know how to change. I've spent so long following a safe path that the idea of leaving it feels impossible. She nodded knowingly. Change is never easy, she said. It can feel frightening because it asks us to step into the unknown. But fear isn't a reason to stop. It's a signal that something important is waiting. That's why noticing matters. When we truly see something, it can guide us toward growth, even if we're unsure at first. Her words struck him deeply. He realized she spoke not from theory, but from experience. She had faced her own challenges and uncertainties, and yet she moved through life with honesty and confidence. The more David listened, the more he understood that part of what had drawn him to her was not just curiosity, but respect. He admired her courage, the way she could confront life without being weighed down by fear or judgment. As they walked, David noticed something subtle but significant, the way she paid attention to the world around them. She noticed small details, the ripple of water in the fountain, the shadow of a bird passing overhead, the faint scent of flowers in the air. Each observation was shared with quiet excitement, not as a lecture but as an invitation. Look closely, she seemed to say. There is more here than you realize. David began trying to see in the same way. He slowed down, noticed patterns in the town that had gone unnoticed for years, and felt a small thrill each time he recognized something new. It was as if she had trained him gently to pay attention. And yet, the more he noticed, the more aware he became of his own limitations. He understood that his life had been shaped by fear and habit, and that awakening to this new perspective required effort, patience, and courage. During one quiet moment, they stopped under a large oak tree. The sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting dancing shadows on the ground. She turned to him and asked, "Do you ever feel that life has more to offer than you allow yourself to experience?" David hesitated. He had thought about this often, but rarely out loud. "Yes," he said finally, "but I'm not sure how to reach it. It feels like I've spent so much time avoiding risk that I've forgotten what it means to take a chance." She smiled gently. "Taking a chance doesn't always mean doing something dramatic," she said. "Sometimes it's as simple as noticing, speaking, or being present. Courage isn't always bold. Sometimes it's quiet." David reflected on her words. He realized that her definition of courage differed from the one he had held in his mind. Courage was not about achieving something grand or impressive. It was about honesty, awareness, and willingness to act, even in small ways. This realization unsettled him, but it also inspired him. He wanted to try, even if it meant facing discomfort or uncertainty. Over the next few days, David found himself experimenting with small acts of courage. He spoke more openly with colleagues, offered help without waiting to be asked, and paid attention to the small joys of life he had once overlooked. Each effort was modest, but it gave him a sense of accomplishment. And with each step, he felt closer to understanding the lessons she had been quietly teaching him, that life's richness was found in presence, honesty, and noticing. Yet, despite these positive changes, David also faced inner conflict. The more he admired her, the more he became aware of the differences between them. She lived with confidence and openness, shaped by experiences he had never had. He sometimes felt inadequate, worried that he would never match the courage and freedom she seemed to embody. And at the same time, he feared that his admiration might be misinterpreted, that he might overstep boundaries he had no right to cross. One evening, as they sat by the river watching the sunset, David voiced some of his concerns. "Sometimes I feel like I'll never understand life the way you do," he admitted. "You see everything clearly, and I feel like I'm always behind, always trying to catch up." She looked at him kindly. "You don't have to see life exactly as I do," she said. "Your perspective is yours, and it is valuable. Life isn't a race or a test. It's about understanding yourself, noticing what matters, and learning from the moments that touch you. You're on your own path, and that is enough." Her words brought both relief and reflection. David realized that his self-doubt had been a barrier to growth. He had been comparing himself to an ideal he could never reach, rather than embracing his own journey. The conversation reminded him that admiration need not lead to imitation. It could inspire growth in his own way. As the weeks continued, David and the woman's interactions deepened in subtle ways. They shared quiet walks, thoughtful conversations, and moments of laughter. They did not rush. They did not force connection, but a bond formed naturally through shared understanding and respect. David began to recognize that true connection was not about proximity or constant interaction, but about recognition and awareness, a meeting of minds and hearts that transcended ordinary social encounters. Despite the growing connection, David's inner conflict persisted. He found himself questioning his intentions, wondering if he truly understood what he felt, or if he was projecting desires and hopes onto her presence. He recognized that she had her own life, shaped by experiences, traditions, and choices that he could never fully inhabit. Respecting her independence while cherishing their bond became a delicate balance, and he approached each interaction with both care and curiosity. One afternoon, as they walked along the edge of the forest near town, she made an observation that stayed with him. "People often confuse closeness with possession," she said. "They think that knowing someone means owning them or that admiration requires control, but real understanding is the opposite. It is freedom, respect, and awareness." David nodded slowly. Her words resonated deeply. He realized that his fascination with her was not about ownership or desire, but about understanding, growth, and the way she had awakened his perception of life. This clarity brought both peace and humility. He understood that he was learning not only about her, but about himself, the strengths, weaknesses, and fears that shaped his life. By now, David felt a quiet gratitude for the presence of someone who had shown him life in a new way. He had begun to notice patterns, appreciate small moments, and reflect on choices with more awareness. He understood that growth was not instantaneous, but cumulative, built through reflection, courage, and attention to detail. As Part 3 drew to a close, David recognized the tension within him as both challenge and gift. The woman had opened his eyes, but the responsibility to grow, to act, and to notice remained his own. She could not change his life for him. She could only illuminate what was already possible. And in this realization, he felt a sense of maturity, humility, and hope. He was learning to navigate complexity, to embrace imperfection, and to live with curiosity, skills that would guide him long after these encounters ended. He understood, finally, that connection and respect mattered more than desire, that awareness mattered more than possession, and that life's richness was revealed in small, thoughtful moments rather than dramatic gestures. And as he walked home that evening, bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun, he felt a quiet sense of readiness, ready to meet life, ready to notice, and ready to grow. The days after their last long walk together passed quietly for David. He carried her presence with him, even when she was not near. Each morning, he noticed the subtle beauty of the world around him, the way the sunlight spilled across the rooftops, the distant sound of children playing, the gentle breeze that moved the leaves in the trees. Life seemed richer, more vivid, as if her words and presence had awakened a part of him that he had long ignored. David's work continued as usual, but his perspective had shifted. He paid more attention to details, both at work and in life. Tasks that had once felt monotonous now seemed part of a larger rhythm. He noticed patterns, small connections, and moments of kindness in ways he never had before. It was not just that he was more observant. It was that he had begun to value the ordinary, to see the extraordinary within it. He thought often about the conversations he had shared with her. The questions she had asked, simple yet profound, had changed the way he reflected on himself. What would you do if you weren't afraid? And do you ever feel that life has more to offer than you allow yourself to experience? These questions returned to him frequently, acting as gentle reminders that growth required effort, courage, and honesty. David also reflected on the lessons she had shared about connection. She had explained that true connection was not about possession, control, or expectation, but about awareness, respect, and understanding. He realized that he had been seeking validation in the past, rather than authentic connection. Meeting her had shown him the difference. The admiration he felt was not selfish or shallow. It was about learning, growing, and appreciating another person's perspective, while maintaining respect for their independence. One afternoon, as he walked along a quiet path near the river, he thought about how much he had changed in the weeks since their encounters had begun. He recognized that she had not changed him directly. She had not given him answers or forced decisions. Instead, she had offered insight, presence, and perspective. It was his responsibility to act on these lessons, to notice life and make choices that aligned with his values and desires. David smiled softly as he remembered their last conversation by the riverbank. She had reminded him that courage was quiet, that noticing and being present were forms of bravery, and that growth often occurred in subtle, incremental steps. He realized that the real gift she had given him was not attention, guidance, or companionship alone, but the awakening of his own awareness, the ability to notice, reflect, and act intentionally. As spring deepened, the town itself seemed to transform. Flowers bloomed in small clusters along the streets, the air grew warmer, and the pace of life felt lighter. David found himself walking more often, sometimes alone, sometimes with the brief hope of seeing her again. Each time he did, he felt a quiet joy, but he also felt peace when she was not present. He had learned that life's richness did not depend on one person, but on the ability to recognize and appreciate the beauty in each moment. One evening, as he returned home after a long day at work, David noticed her standing near the small bridge that crossed the river. She waved gently when she saw him, and he walked toward her with a mixture of familiarity and reflection. They did not speak immediately. Instead, they stood quietly, watching the water flow beneath the bridge, the sky painted with shades of orange and purple. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but confident. "It's been a while since we talked about the future," she said. "How do you feel about the life you're living now?" David considered her question carefully. He had thought about it often, yet he now realized that his perspective had shifted entirely. "I feel awake," he said. "I notice things I didn't before. I appreciate moments I used to ignore. I'm learning to face fear instead of avoiding it, and I'm learning to value connection without needing control." She nodded, a gentle smile crossing her face. "That's what life is about," she said. "Not perfection, not certainty, but noticing, learning, and growing. You have done well." David felt a surge of gratitude. He understood that their time together, brief as it had been, had changed him in profound ways. He did not need to possess her attention or approval to benefit from the lessons she had shared. The change was within him, and it was lasting. As the sun dipped lower and the first stars appeared, they continued walking together, not speaking much, but sharing a sense of quiet understanding. Each step felt significant, not because of the path they were on, but because of the awareness they brought to it. David understood that life was made of moments like this, quiet, reflective, and deeply meaningful. Eventually, they reached a point where they had to part once again. This time, David did not feel the pang of longing he had felt during previous farewells. Instead, he felt calm, centered, and grateful. He had learned that some connections do not require permanence to be meaningful. The lessons and awareness she had instilled in him would remain, guiding his actions and perceptions for the rest of his life. She looked at him, her expression gentle but firm. "Remember," she said, "life is not about what you gain from others, but what you discover about yourself. Notice, reflect, and grow. That is enough." David nodded, understanding fully now what she meant. He realized that her words were not only advice, but a reflection of her own life philosophy. She lived consciously, with attention and respect, and in doing so, she had shown him a path he could follow, even without her physical presence. As he walked home that evening, David reflected on the journey he had been on. Meeting her had been unexpected, brief, and intense, but it had sparked a transformation within him. He had learned to notice the small details of life, to appreciate the ordinary as extraordinary, and to embrace courage in quiet, meaningful ways. He had learned the difference between admiration and possession, between connection and control. And most importantly, he had learned that life's richness came from awareness, respect, and understanding, lessons that no amount of time alone could have taught him. The next morning, David woke with a renewed sense of purpose. He carried the awareness she had sparked in him into every part of his day. He greeted his neighbors with warmth, noticed the beauty of the sunrise, and engaged with his work and community more fully than ever before. Each small choice, each attentive moment reminded him that life was alive, and that noticing it made all the difference. Weeks turned into months, and David continued to grow in subtle but meaningful ways. He took time to reflect on his past, to appreciate his present, and to consider possibilities for the future. The fear that had once limited him no longer held the same power. He understood that fear was a guide, a signal to act thoughtfully, not an obstacle to life itself. Though he did not see the woman as often, her influence remained. He remembered her words, her calm confidence, and the gentle way she had guided him without demanding anything in return. He realized that true impact was not about constant presence, but about planting seeds of awareness that could grow in time. She had planted such a seed, and it had blossomed within him. One quiet afternoon, David sat on a bench near the river, reflecting on all that had changed. He thought about the early days of noticing her, the long conversations by the riverbank, and the walks through town that had shifted his perspective. He smiled to himself, realizing that life was richer, more vibrant, and more meaningful than he had ever imagined. He understood that growth, awareness, and connection were the greatest gifts one could receive. In this reflection, he also acknowledged the quiet truth. Some encounters do not last forever, but they leave lasting impressions. Some people enter our lives not to stay, but to awaken something within us that changes the way we live, think, and feel. She had been such a person for him, and he was grateful. As the sun set, casting golden light over the river, David felt a sense of completion. He did not need closure in the traditional sense, for the growth she had inspired was already a form of closure. The lessons were learned, the awareness awakened, and the perspective transformed. He understood that life would continue, that challenges would come, and that uncertainty would remain, but he was prepared to meet it with presence, courage, and respect. He stood up from the bench, taking a deep breath of the cool evening air. The town was quiet, the river calm, and the sky painted with stars. David knew that he carried something precious, the ability to notice, to reflect, and to grow. It was a gift that no one could take away, a lesson that would guide him through all the days to come. And in that quiet moment, David smiled, feeling a profound sense of peace. He had learned the value of presence, the power of understanding, and the importance of respect. Life, he realized, was not about what he gained from others, but about what he discovered within himself. And that discovery, awakened by a single meaningful encounter, would remain with him forever.